ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another edition of the Democratic View. I'm the hostess, and my name is Phyllis Italiano, and I've been doing this a long time. And today I have with me one of the heroes of our area. Her name is Brady, and she is the executive director of the Long Island Commercial Fishing Association.
That's it, Phyllis. You got it. Good job.
See?
That's me.
Even old people like me can remember things.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. That's a high praise. I don't know if I'm deserving of it, but I appreciate that. It's very nice of you.
Well, one of the things I really was anxious to hear you talk about was because I think people have no idea of what Cox's Ledge is and what it means to our sustainable fishing industry.
Well, I guess a little background. Cox's Ledge is the area that the South Fork Wind Farm is being sited in that area. They want to put 15 turbines and a offshore substation, otherwise known as an electric service platform, on that site. Cox's Ledge is known for being complex bottom habitat that is including glacial moraines. So I actually was in Alaska with my husband. I've never been before, and so I actually got to see glaciers. So
I've been to Alaska. I know what you're talking about.
It was really cool. But in relation to what a glacial moraine is basically, and I was speaking right before I came here to a couple of scientist friends of mine so that I wouldn't screw this up. I may still anyway. But during, I guess, what was referred to as the Wisconsin period, when the glacier was moving, basically, if you were to do the same with your foot on sand and push it in one way, that's how the glacial area within Cox's Ledge pushed all this material we're talking about, giant boulders and sediment and everything else, and then it shoved it all in this way, and then as it receded, it did it in the other way. So you have an area of bottom habitat that is considered essential fish habitat. It is specifically a very high grain of sand, along with cobble, along with basic edges of this moraine that are the size of a house. They have boulders in that area that are up to 35 feet tall. Wow. And what it does is it gives fish and shellfish the ability throughout their life cycles to be able to either cod spawn in that area. Other species, the young of the year, they hide in those areas where there's smaller rocks and cobbles so that they don't get eaten, because it is an eat or be eaten world in the fish world. And it is considered an area of particular concern, glacial moraines, within the state of Rhode Island. In fact, when the Coastal Resource Management Council had recently, and I'm just grabbing my thing here, spoken of the South Fork Wind Farm, the Coastal Resource Management Council, they do the work for the state of Rhode Island on the coastal resources, including the waterways. And
I just want to interrupt you for one
Sure,
second,
go ahead.
because I do want to explain to people what many people do not realize is that North America was covered with an incredible amount of snow and ice.
Right,
Okay.
right.
And that is what eventually melted and
Right.
pushed up.
Right.
And that's what formed Long
Exactly,
Island.
exactly.
And a lot of people don't know that.
And under the water too, and that's what the Cox's Ledge area is. It is why there's a little bit of upwelling, but it is basically almost kind of, I think it was created maybe, I want to say it was about 18,000 years ago. So you have this area of incredible vibrance where you have all kinds of different fish species in that area, and that's the area that Ørsted, the foreign government-owned energy company, owned 50% by the country of Denmark, wants to pile drive. How tall are the turbines now? I think they're about 836-foot monopiles into the ocean floor. Then they want to jet plow 6 to 8 feet, liquefying that ocean floor to lay cable and juice it with electromagnetic frequency, and then pull a cable from there all the way, I think it's 56 miles, down around Montauk and in through Wainscott.
Yeah, and people have to also understand that what you're calling called EMFs, and what they give off,
Electromagnetic frequency,
yes,
right.
what they give off kills.
Well, there's two different things when you have a cable. There's the actual electric that comes from that, and what I believe they want to do, I know from being involved in this process somewhat through New York State's Article 7, they bury the cable because of the heat that comes off of the cable. By burying it, it cools it. But they can't bury it any lower than 6 feet. So that's why the cutoff is 6 feet. From a commercial fishing perspective, if you're a trawler or something, you want to see it buried and not be exposed. In Europe, where they have many of these, many of them are consistently exposed. There's one project, I believe it was oh gosh, I want to remember the name. I know at least of 3 projects, but there was one that was basically exposed the second it started, and where they have these, what they call these open expanses, where when you have a sand whirl that moves across the ocean floor, basically the height of the sand kind of mountain, when it moves, it also has a depth of that. So you have these expanses of cable that are just freestanding on their own. That's a problem. The electromagnetic frequency, on the other hand, that exists. It doesn't matter if you bury it. The reason for burying it is to keep it farther away from people. If it is laying right at the ocean floor, there is a hot zone of, I believe, 6 to 10 feet around that area. And there are certain species of fish like elasmobranchs and sharks, skates and sharks, that are attracted to electromagnetic frequency. That's how they use actually electromagnetic frequency to chase prey. And there are other species that, so far, when looking at studies, we know from Rhode Island, actually, they did a study that lobster do not like that. I've heard from Rhode Island fishermen that the lobster, they did an open vent trap, or yeah, I think it was a closed vent trap, forgive me, with the lobsters in the area of the Block Island Wind Farm, and the lobsters do not appear to be going into that area anymore. They don't like it. So depending upon what you are, whether you are repulsed by it or attracted by it, it basically is changing the ecosystem of the area. Now, the pile driving, not only for fish, which is a huge problem, but we've got the North Atlantic right whale. And the North Atlantic right whale has basically spent quite a few months right in Cox's Ledge. There is a website called, and I'll find out for you before we leave, or you can put it up on whatever website you have, where you can actually track the patterns of the North Atlantic right whale. And they've been in that area. Why? Because it's so vibrant, you know. Fish are eating there, and they are too. And so pile driving, anything. In fact, there was a joint letter from NRDC and Conservation Law Foundation requesting, I think, a 1,000 meter site of keeping out or monitoring for right whales, because the pile driving is at such a frequency that it is louder than 160 decibels, which would be considered a level B take, which isn't an actual death, but it's considered an harassment. So anything that would involve breeding or ecolating or I believe breeding or migrating, anything that would keep them from their normal pattern is a concern. In fact, let's see if I can find the document here that who are these folks? I'll tell you who. These things can be found also. It's on the website for the Coastal Resource Management Council is where I've got these. This was the Natural Resource Defense.
The website is the Coastal?
It's the Rhode Island. It's crmc.ri.gov. I'll get you the site so people want to find and read this information. I'm not making it up. It's right there. But this was a letter requesting from the Conservation Law Foundation, National Resource Defense Council, National Wildlife Foundation, in which they basically, I believe, were talking about that they were concerned because of the right whale areas and the amount of whales that were involved. In fact, they spoke about that northern Atlantic right whales are present in the South Fork Wind Farm, and that there was a mandatory seasonal management vessel speed restriction from November 1st to April 30th because of the right whales in the area. And they also speak to the fact that they're very concerned because right whales, they do skim feeding, which is an important activity, and this is a quote, identified in impact assessments because first it demonstrates a critical behavior feeding, which could be disrupted by introduced noise, and secondly, it represents a vulnerable time for right whales to be exposed to ship strikes because they are active at or near the surface. They've spoken about the monopiles and for pile driving. That's going to be 2 to 4 days of pile driving at a level that if you're within the hot zone of 500 feet, you can actually deafen whales, the right whale, minke whales that hear in the lower frequencies that are going to be affected. Plus, like anything, almost like an explosion, when you have the pounding of this into the ground, you also have concussive waves of pressure, and that would affect fish with swim bladders and fish even without squid and that sort, forage species that everyone eats from. I did want to say one thing, though, that is the part that it's kind of shocking. The Rhode Island CRMC staff summary and recommendations was their federal consistency review of the South Fork Wind Project. And on page 11, they speak specifically, let me see, well, there's many things. They talk about cable failures, but they basically said that on the page 11, they refer to how the development of offshore wind under the ocean SAMP was envisioned as a process in a controlled and scientifically supported way under the guidance of adaptive management with a regional view. The logical development pathway was to start with demonstration projects like the Block Island Wind Farm, the one in Virginia, Seavow, and a floating wind turbine project in Maine. The next logical step is to scale development up to a small utility scale project based on the lessons learned from the first step. Remember, the Block Island Wind Farm, their cables still aren't buried, and they've been in the ground now for about 5 years. So anyway, let's see, this allows proactive planning based on scientific best practices. The proposed South Fork project is exactly aligned with the desired progression in size and scope, but here's the part. Nevertheless, the location of the South Fork Wind Project on Cox's Ledge, an area known for its biological diversity, is in our view one of the worst possible locations in Rhode Island Sound for this project. There is significant uncertainty and lessons yet to be learned without citing the South Fork Wind Project directly on glacial moraine, including complex marine habitat with similar characteristics as CRMC has designated areas of particular concern in state waters. If the same site and project were located within state waters, at least 38% of the South Fork Wind Lease area would be designated as areas of particular concern. The project location selected will impact many Rhode Island-based coastal uses and early life stages for many important commercial and recreational species found within the South Fork Wind Lease area. And that's from the staff of the Rhode Island Coastal Resource Management Council themselves. That areas of particular concern in state waters would have been removed and not allowed to be built on.
It's just amazing
It's
that
mind-boggling.
this should have gotten as far as it has gotten. And what people don't know is that, of course, this is to increase our electrical abilities, and what it's going to do to our actual bills that we
exactly.
get is going to be enormous because of this bill. What I also am wondering about and have wondered about all along is what are these towers made of?
Well, it's fiberglass. Their steel is the actual monopile itself, but the blades are all made of fiberglass and they cannot be recycled. There's nothing that can be done with them. They're being buried right now in landfills in Montana and in other areas out west. I know the Norwegians have been talking about, I believe there's a BPA in them. And so there's a concern that over time that BPA is being leaked into the environment.
And BPA is?
The biphenyl A. It's the one that they had for like sippy cups for kids, and they pulled it off of shelves, like for bottles for children. They pulled it off the shelves, I think about, maybe about 10 years ago? But there's a concern because the fiberglass, if you go to compress it, it basically goes into the air. And that over time, you can see in Europe that the blades over time, the coating comes off of them. Now, the people that make the blades, I know there was, I think, a lawsuit a couple of years back by someone working in one of these plants. I don't know the company, because they had been affected by breathing in the fumes from these. I mean, this is not an environmentally friendly project. This is not a do no harm project. This is to apparently do as much harm as you can, but you're a foreign government-owned energy company, and unfortunately, people are being led astray. They don't, I mean, the information that I've tried to put out there, that we've put out, not only through our Facebook page, those are all scientific studies. You know, you can look and find them. In fact, the EU, they just recently had a listing, and I'm not sure that I could find it for you, but they just came out with a report that states that the wind loss that can be had in the ocean can exist for up to 40 kilometers past an individual wind energy area. A couple of years back, a company called DNVGL did a document that determined that because of the size of the blade, I mean, we're talking 836 feet. The blades are the length of a football field, which is, 300 feet? That's 100 yards. And so that when these things are spinning, and they spin at about 175 miles an hour, it doesn't look like that because they're so big, but that's how fast they're actually going, that it takes wind when you line wind turbines up behind each other or in various configurations. The first turbine steals some of the wind so that the turbines behind it don't get as much wind source. So it actually shows that it will be less effective. On top of that, the EU study determined that, in fact, if you have, I'm making it up here, but if you have a triangled wind energy area, that up to 40 kilometers outside of that wind energy area, depending on which way the wind is going, that there's less wind in the area. Now, why is that important? The majority of the leases that are right now taking place in the Atlantic Ocean are between 12 and 15 miles offshore, where some of the most vibrant fishing grounds are. There's a reason the commercial fishermen are complaining. It's because these are some of the most prolific fishing grounds. Why are they prolific? Because these are areas of the ocean that are known for their upwelling. And what creates the upwelling is wind on the ocean water, which cools and creates upwelling from the bottom of the ocean with the various phytoplankton and then everything that eats it along the way. So you have these areas of incredible ecological importance that are basically the centers of the ocean's productivity. And now they're going to have wind turbines put on them where they're going to decrease the wind. If they're only 12 to 15 miles away, first of all, they're going to decrease the wind in the area. They could risk destroying the ocean's productivity because the upwelling won't occur. And you've got something like the Mid-Atlantic Cold Pool, which is the area south of Long Island in the New York Bight that actually keeps that area. It's a protective mechanism that keeps the water cooler so that we don't have the same issues of warming that we do in, say, the Gulf of Maine in certain areas. And that area is all as a result of wind, and they've done studies on that also. So if we remove surface winds, not only from that area so that we don't have as productive upwelling, plus if it goes for up to 40 kilometers, that means we're not going to get the land breezes that we normally get off of right when you're standing on the ocean, on why people come to the shore. So what happens if you have less land breezes? You're going to be using your air conditioning more. You're going to be using your electricity more. And who does that benefit? The wind companies and the utility companies. And I've talked to scientists that are talking about modeling it because that's the dooms. I mean, would that not happen? Maybe. But the EU study is now showing that it is taking away from the wind up to 40 kilometers long. We've seen the wind wake effect, which depending upon the certain microclimes, depending on where the wind turbines are sited, they can actually create their own weather patterns. If it's the water is particularly cold and the air is particularly hot, there was an area in Neistat that created a huge area of fog in that specific area.
You know, here's one of my big questions. Now, I have lived in my house since 2002. I have never had a brownout. Never. Mm-hmm. And I'm in Springs, the most densely populated area. Right. What is this all about? Well, why are we doing this here? This should be done up island somewhere, not here.
Well, unfortunately, the reason the South Fork Wind Farm is here is because this, let's see, Jeffrey Grabowski, who used to be the head of Deepwater Wind, he was initially the chief of staff for Governor Carcieri. And he, I believe, was chief of staff from maybe 2005 to 2006, at which point he decided he wanted to go back to the private sector. He went to work for an attorney's firm in Rhode Island that turned out to be one of the law firms that was the law firm representing Deepwater Wind. And in 2008, Mr. Grabowski came back as the head of Deepwater Wind and began lobbying the state to create the Ocean SAMP and to create an offshore wind site, both in state waters and in offshore waters. At the time, they created this process with the Rhode Island task force, and they also supposedly were to have included Massachusetts. The last day they signed a memorandum of understanding which allowed Massachusetts to be a part of it. They said they included New York, but they didn't really. They didn't notify New York. The one in federal waters is not state-owned land, it's federal, and as such, if any state that has, say, commercial fishermen can prove through a geographic location definition that that area is important economically to another state, they can apply to have federal consistency over the project. New York never did it, nothing. So Rhode Island went through their SAMP process. They picked the Block Island Wind Farm as the site. They picked the larger area that has Cox's Ledge in it as the Rhode Island Wind Energy Area. Massachusetts signed on in the last week of the project before it was released, so they could also have federal consistency over it. It's why they just came up with news that Massachusetts fishermen are going to be compensated for the South Fork Wind Farm project. Now, meanwhile, Rhode Island is being compensated because they've got consistency review. Massachusetts just announced that they are going to be compensated for their fishermen because they have consistency review. Meanwhile, New York's fishermen on Long Island, where we're frankly as close, if not closer, to the area than Rhode Island, the rest of the land itself, definitely Massachusetts, nothing. Nothing.
Well, it isn't only a matter of being compensated. It's a matter of the fact, don't we need that fish to eat?
Well, that's also what the Coastal Resource Management Council staff, they talk about in this, is that they believe that, and I don't know if I can find it fast enough, and I don't want to bore everyone at the same time while I'm trying to find documentation, but they talk about the fact that there was a definite, as far as in the commercial fishermen's, will lose a great amount, up to 100% of the area during construction and decommissioning, and they could lose up to 80% of that area because when they're putting the cables in, the fishermen that have historically used those areas, whether they were scalloping or trawling, won't be able to use them. If there's an exposed cable on the ocean floor and a trawler or a scalloper catches it with its gear, it risks flipping its boat and they could lose their crew. I mean, it's a really serious issue. In Rhode Island, for the Block Island project, we had, when they did the town board meeting, Joel Hovannesian, who's a commercial trawler, came over from Rhode Island to specifically talk about it because they wanted him to sign a non-disclosure agreement when his net caught the thing so that he would be compensated, and he refused.
We don't have much more time. I want
Sorry.
to ask you a question. Did the town of East Hampton accept money from Orsted?
Well, I mean, they did the $29 million package, but that did nothing for the commercial fishing industry or the charter fishing industry, which also in Montauk exists a lot. I mean, that is known for cod. It is one of the last areas literally on the Atlantic coast that is considered cod spawning ground. The National Marine Fisheries Service notified and told BOEM as much, but they don't have the ability to say no.
My other question to you is that we all know that the wind farm relies on wind. And isn't it true that in the summertime, the wind from Montauk dies down and they would not be able to run them?
Well, in Block Island Wind Farm, you can use that as an example. During the winter months, they've had people are confused. When you hear I'm going to make up a number, 200 megawatt project, that only means the nameplate. That's not what it actually creates. On average, wind is 38% of nameplate. So a 200 megawatt project would only be about 80 megawatts of energy. For the Block Island wind farm, it was up to 55% of the nameplate in the winter. In the summer, 26%. So for a 30 megawatt project, that's about 7 to 8 megawatts only. That's all it does. And
Well,
they're
it
4 to
seems-
6 times more expensive with all of this biological issues. You don't destroy the environment to save it.
So in the last minute, we all have to agree to the fact that this is a very stupid idea. And I don't know why the town of East Hampton was hoodwinked into supporting this.
I know at the
1 minute.
I know when they first put in the 100% sustainable, I called Larry Cantwell because I was concerned because I knew about this wind project they were trying to do. And he told me, oh no, Bonnie, we would always get in touch with the fishermen first. Of course we would discuss anything with you beforehand. When I found out at a LIPA meeting that they were supporting it, I called him up and he said, well, what can we do? And I was like, you can't.
You can say no.
Right.
You know,
But that was once they'd already signed on.
Yeah.
I think perhaps they thought, you know, it sounds it's like very magical, like the emperor's new clothes. Oh, look, it's going to be great.
Except that they also don't tell you that the actual price of electricity will go up.
They don't.
And we are now going to, in the last 20 seconds.
They don't tell you about the price. They don't tell you about the biological destruction. They don't tell you about 4 to 6 times the cost. And when the Coastal Resource Management Council of Rhode Island tells you it's a bad idea, why are we doing it?
Beats me. Beats me. And coming in at Beach Lane on a street that says no wide, the narrow street is absolutely crazy. Thank you for coming, Bonnie. I wish to God we had another half hour because I would like to talk more about
Well,
this.
I'll keep reading these documents and we can come back in the future.
You know what? It's true.
Right. No, it's huge.
It's true.
It's
We'll
a big
do
deal.
another show.
It's a big
mean
deal.
it,
I'll
you
try
know,
to bring some people, maybe I can bring a scientist with me.
because this is really such a crazy idea.
And that doesn't even talk about the safety and the radar and the search and rescue issues. That could be next time.